Welcome back to Disturbed Reality. In the past 12 months or so, the so-called GoreTuber genre on YouTube has grown exponentially, though in reality we are a small subgenre within the true crime community. For whatever reason, society has always had a fascination for the macabre. One particular fascination lies with serial killers. The likes of Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and John Wayne Gacy are household names across the United States, whereas in the UK, the crimes of Peter Sutcliffe, aka the Yorkshire Ripper, and the murder of Jamie Bolger are etched into the nation's psyche. The general public seem to be fascinated by such cases, many of which occur from the 1960s to the 1980s, an era which is described as a brutal golden age for serial killers in the Western world. Many theories exist for why the number of serial killers was so high during this time period. One such theory is hypothesized by Canadian author Peter Vronsky. He speculates that the sheer amount of serial killers in the West during this time period was largely due to the after effects of World War II. He speculated on the effects of men having returned from battle, brutal battle, raising young children, whereas other theories delve into conspiracy, with many believing that a large number of the serial killers during that time period were a result of the MKUltra project, which was run by the CIA between 1953 and 1973. Many speculate that the leader of the Killer Manson family cult, Charlie Manson, was a subject of the MKUltra experiments. Conspiracy theories aside, the serial killer craze of the 1960s to the 1980s wasn't solely a Western phenomenon. In fact, the Soviet Union, or the USSR, had the same disturbing trend, the most notable example being Andrei Chikatilo, also known as the Rostov Ripper, a man who killed 52 people from 1978 to 1990, making him one of the most prolific serial killers that the world has ever seen. Andrei Chikatilo wasn't a lone case. A whole host of other serial killers run rampant through the old school Soviet Union, a lesser known example being the child killer, Anatoly Slivko. Anatoly was convicted of the murder of 7 boys between 1964 and 1985, as well as the murder of 43 others. But who was Anatoly Slivko? He was born with the full name of Anatoly Yemilievich Slivko on the 28th of December 1938, his birthplace being in Izhbash, Dagestan in the Soviet Union. Childhood wasn't easy for young Anatoly. First and foremost, he had a serious health condition called hydrocephalus, a condition in which conduces of a build-up of fluid in the cavities deep within the brain, which resulted in numerous genital urinary tract problems for Anatoly, including erectile dysfunction as an adolescent and bedwetting as a child. Furthermore, as he grew up, he battled with insomnia and found it difficult to eat, which contributed to his emaciated state. Furthermore, in combination with Slivko's health problems, he was born into a working-class family. Money was tight, and things weren't easy. This was exasperated when Slivko's father was conscripted into the army to fight against Germany in World War II. Slivko's father was imprisoned by the army and later was returned home, only to be ridiculed by the locals. As a result, Slivko had to suffer bullying at school for his father's assumed cowardice. Despite the hardships, Anatoly eventually got through his formative school years and decided that he wanted to enroll in Moscow State University. However, once again Anatoly faced disappointment. He failed his entry exam to get into the university. Soon after, Anatoly was called up to national service but once again, he struggled to fit in. His fellow conscripts saw him as an oddball. They teased him and bullied him. Upon completing national service, Anatoly moved to Stavropol in the Rostov Oblast in 1960, where he got a job as a telephone engineer. On the surface, it seemed like things were finally going right for Anatoly. He also developed a passion for filmography. In fact, he was somewhat of a local celebrity after creating amateur documentaries on the atrocities that the Germans committed in World War II. He was generally well liked by his local community, though at this time and throughout his whole life, Anatoly was having an internal battle with his sexuality. He realised from very young that he was attracted to men, but due to the times, he had to keep this hidden and suppressed. 1961 would prove to be a pivotal turning point for the then 23-year-old Anatoly. During that year, he had witnessed a traffic accident involving a drunken motorcyclist who fatally killed a young teenage boy who was wearing a Young Pioneers uniform. He later confessed that watching the boy experience convulsions in his death as the smell of gasoline and fire permeated the air made him sexually excited for some inexplicable reasons. It was the trigger point for Anatoly's sadism. It was around this time where Anatoly, who was a trusted member of the community, started to volunteer for a local children's club. In 1963, Anatoly's younger sister, who had moved in with him in Stavropol, had arranged for him to meet a local girl named Ludmila after realizing his failure to attract female attention. Despite the fact that he knew himself to be homosexual since his adolescence, he went on to marry her in 1963. According to Slivio, throughout his long married life with Ludmila, which lasted for 17 years, they had less than a dozen sexual encounters. Nevertheless, in spite of his sexual problems and disinterest in women, he fathered 2 sons with her. It was in 1963, the same year he got married, where he started to exploit his position at the local children's club. He propositioned the boys with a contrived experiment in which he said would make them taller. The method being a controlled hanging in which he said would stretch the spine of the subject and subsequently would make them taller. Tragically, many boys took Anatoly at his word. Before each experiment, he would instruct his victims not to eat to avoid vomiting. He would also dress up the boys in a Young Pioneers uniform, just like the boy in the traffic accident. After successfully making his victims unconscious via hanging, Slivio would then strip them naked, tempt them to satisfy his sexual fantasies, and in most cases, he would use his filmography skills to film the whole incident. During a period of 22 years, he sexually exploited at least 43 boys, most of whom resumed a normal life after gaining consciousness, oblivious of what previously happened. Anatoly Slivio would often keep the clothes and shoes of his victims as a memento, and again, in 36 cases, he filmed the experiments, presumably to keep himself occupied until he could find his next victim. However, in 7 cases, wasn't enough to arouse Anatoly. He took it a step further. From 1964 to 1982, he would go on to kill 7 boys. Their ages ranged from 11 years old to 15 years old. His first victim was a 15-year-old homeless boy who was later identified as Nikolai Dobryshev. He was killed on the 2nd of June, 1984. According to Anatoly Slivio, this was a mistake. He was unable to revive him back from unconsciousness, which prompted Anatoly to dismember Nikolai's body and subsequently bury him. He destroyed the film and photographs as well. Despite the first murder being an accident, according to Anatoly, he couldn't get it out of his head, and he had a bloodlust for young boys. He killed his second victim Alexei Kovalenko in May 1965. Once again, he repeated the same process. He hanged the boy to death and subsequently dismembered him, though this time it said that Anatoly set the boy's limbs on fire with gasoline to recreate the smell and feelings that Anatoly felt on that fateful day in 1963 with the traffic accident. Slivio would dismember his victims with a combination of hacksaws and hatchets. After the second murder in 1965,